Hey everyone, Josh here from Real Talk, and today I wanted to give you something a little different. This is a short story that I wrote that I've been working on, and I just thought I would share it out there and see what people think, if anybody likes it, if they have any feedback, and just to kind of get it out there. So, without any further ado, here is The Skin She Wore by Josh Bell. The summer air wrapped around Jack like a heavy blanket, laden with the hum of cicadas and the intoxicating sweetness of magnolia blossoms. The kind of air that clung on your skin and made your clothes damp by midday. Savannah was like that, beautiful and relentless all at once. It wasn't just the heat, though. The city had a way of getting under your skin, of whispering secrets you didn't realize you were listening to until it was too late. For Jack, Savannah had seemed like the perfect place to start over. After the mess of his divorce in Chicago, the sprawling southern city felt like a balm to his bruised pride and fractured heart. He wanted simplicity, no skyscrapers, no crowded trains, no constant reminders of the life he'd lost. Instead, he found a dilapidated little house near the marshlands, its once white paint chipped and its shutters hanging precariously. "It's got character," the realtor had said, flashing a too bright smile. "It's falling apart," Jack had replied, though he bought it anyway. He convinced himself it was a project, something to keep his hands busy while his mind healed. By mid-June, he'd made little progress on the home. The heat sapped his energy, and the silence of the marsh was louder than he'd anticipated. The nights stretched long, filled with the chorus of frogs and crickets, a soundtrack that was equal parts soothing and isolating. She appeared one afternoon while Jack was sanding the warped boards of his front porch. She came as if conjured by the sun itself, stepping out from behind an ancient oak as if she'd always been there. Jack froze mid-motion, the rasp of the sandpaper falling silent. "Need a hand?" she asked. Her voice was low and smooth, rich with a cadence that hinted at roots deeply entwined with the South. She was stunning, her skin the deep, warm brown of polished mahogany, her hair cascading in thick waves down her back. But it was her eyes that held him captive, large and luminous, catching the light like two twin moons suspended in an eternal dusk. "I wouldn't want to impose," Jack said, though his throat was suddenly dry. "Impose?" She tilted her head, her smile teasing. "In Savannah, we look after each other. You're new, aren't you?" He nodded, feeling strangely vulnerable beneath her gaze. "I'm Lysandra," she said, extending a hand. "Jack." He wiped his palm on his jeans before shaking hers, her touch cool despite the heat. From that day forward, Lysandra was a constant presence in Jack's life. She had a way of showing up unannounced, always carrying something: fresh peaches, a loaf of cornbread, jars of honey so dark it was almost black. At first, Jack thought it was neighborly kindness. The southern hospitality he'd heard so much about. "You don't have to keep doing this," he said one afternoon as she handed him a tin of freshly baked biscuits. "I know," she replied, her lips curling into that enigmatic smile, "but I want to." Lysandra was more than generous. She was capable, too. She helped Jack with repairs around the house, effortlessly fixing the leaking faucet in the kitchen while he fumbled with the instructions. She seemed to know everything about Savannah, regaling him with stories about the city's history, its ghosts, its secrets. "These streets have seen things," she said one evening as they sat on his porch sipping sweet tea. "Some of them you don't want to know about." Jack chuckled. "Like what?" She smirked, leaned closer. Have you heard of the Boo Hag? He shook his head. Sounds like something out of a campfire story. Oh, it's much older than that, she said, her voice dropping into a near whisper. They say she's a skinless creature, all muscle and sinew, glistening in the moonlight. She slips into homes at night, wearing the skin of her victims like a dress. Jack shivered despite the oppressive heat. She rides you in your sleep, Lysandra continued, her tone almost hypnotic, presses down on your chest, steals your breath, drains your energy. If you wake up while she's there, well, let's just say most people don't live to tell the tale. Jack forced a laugh, trying to shake the unease creeping up his spine. Sounds horrifying. It's just a story, Lysandra said, leaning back with a shrug. But her smile lingered, sharp and knowing, as if there was more truth to her words than she was letting on. After that night, Jack found himself thinking about the Boo Hag, more often than he cared to admit. The story Lysandra told seemed to cling to him, much like that of the Savannah itself. He told himself it was silly, just folklore meant to scare children. Yet something about the way Lysandra spoke of the creature, so vivid, so certain, made his stomach twist. Still, her presence in his life was comforting in an odd way. She filled the void left by his ex-wife, though Jack tried not to think of it in those terms. Lysandra wasn't a replacement. She was different. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Lysandra arrived with a basket of wildflowers. She arranged them in a jar on his kitchen table, her movements fluid and deliberate like a dancer. "Why are you so kind to me?" Jack blurted out, the question escaping before he could even stop it. She paused, her fingers brushing against the petals of a flower. "Does kindness need a reason?" "No, but—" Jack hesitated. "It feels like you're always here, like you're watching over me." Lysandra's smile returned, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe you need watching over, Jack." That night Jack dreamt of shadows. In his dream he was back in the marsh, the air thick and still. He saw Lysandra standing among the reeds, her back to him. When she turned, her face was gone, replaced by a glistening expanse of raw muscle and exposed sinew. She held something in her hands, a tattered, empty skin. Jack woke with a start, his chest heaving. His bedroom was dark, the only sound the distant croak of frogs outside. He sat up, running a hand through his damp hair. "It's just a dream," he muttered. But as he lay back down, the faintest sound reached his ears, a soft, almost imperceptible scraping, like nails dragging across wood. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The first time Jack woke up drenched in sweat, he thought it was the southern heat, a lingering byproduct of Savannah's muggy summer nights. The second time he blamed nightmares, those shadowy echoes of his subconscious that had been stirred by Lysandra's eerie stories. But the third time was different. That morning, pale light streaming through warped shutters, he noticed faint scratches trailing along his forearms and bluish bruises spreading like ink stains across his chest, as though something heavy had pressed down on him during the night. He tried to dismiss it, convincing himself it was restless tossing and turning, but the unease stayed with him throughout the day. Even as he repaired the rickety porch railing and trimmed the overgrown hedges, he felt the weight of exhaustion creeping into his bones. His movements were sluggish, his mind fogged, and Savannah's charm seemed dull, its beauty overshadowed by a looming sense of dread. Lysandra, as perceptive as ever, noticed the changes. She appeared one afternoon with a wicker basket of ripe peaches and a pitcher of sweet tea, her usual air of mystery tempered with concern. "You look terrible," she said, pouring the tea and handing him a glass. "Thanks for that," Jack muttered, downing the drink in one gulp. "Been sleeping poorly?" He hesitated, unsure whether to share the peculiar details. "Yeah, weird dreams," he admitted. "It feels like, I don't know, like something's sitting on my chest, heavy, suffocating." For a brief moment, Lysandra's ever-present smile faltered, her brow creasing with what Jack thought was genuine worry. She set the pitcher down carefully before speaking. "You should keep a broom under your bed," she said after a pause. "A broom?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Old Southern superstition," she explained with a shrug. "It keeps the Boo Hag away. She gets distracted counting the bristles." Jack laughed, shaking his head. "Of course, the Boo Hag." "Laugh all you want," Lysandra replied, her tone light but her expression serious. "But it won't hurt to try." That night, as an afterthought, Jack slid an old broom under his bed. The bristles were frayed, the handle splintered, but he figured there was no harm in humoring her suggestions. After all, the nightmares couldn't get much worse. Over the following weeks, the unease had taken root in Jack's life, blossomed into full-blown paranoia. His energy ebbed away like water through a sieve. Even simple tasks left him winded. The once cozy house, with its peeling paint and creaking floorboards, felt oppressive. The walls closing in a little more each day. Worse, Lysandra's presence, which had once been a source of comfort, now felt strangely invasive. She was always there, bringing meals, fixing leaking pipes, telling her stories. But her lingering gaze seemed heavier, her laughter tinged with something Jack couldn't quite place. The nights were worse. The oppressive weight returned regularly, leaving him immobile and grasping for air. His dreams were vivid and horrifying, filled with shadowy figures and the sensation of being drained, as though his very life force was slipping away. Each morning he woke to find new marks on his body, scratches, bruises, even faint impressions as though someone had gripped his wrists with inhuman strength. Lysandra continued to notice his decline. "You need rest," she told him one afternoon, her voice gentle yet firm. "Let me stay tonight. I'll make sure nothing bothers you." "No," Jack said quickly, the sharpness in his voice surprising them both. He softened his tone. "I just need to figure this out on my own." That night the air was thick with the scent of salt and marsh, the distant croak of bullfrogs a haunting backdrop. Jack lay in bed, the broom securely under him, and tried to convince himself it was all in his head. Exhaustion eventually pulled him under, but his sleep was anything but restful. He woke to a crushing weight pinning him down. His eyes snapped open, but his body refused to obey his commands. Panic surged as he scanned the dimly lit room, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Then he saw her. Lysandra stood at the foot of his bed. But it wasn't her, not the Lysandra he knew. Her once smooth skin was gone, stripped away to reveal sinewy muscle glistening with a sickly sheen in the moonlight. Her hair was a wild tangle of darkness, and her eyes, those twin moons that had once captivated him, burned with a feral intensity, their light now cold and cruel. "Shh," she murmured, her voice a twisted echo of its former honeyed lilt. She leaned closer, the scent of decay clinging to her like a second skin. You are mine now." Jack tried to scream, to thrash, to do anything to break free. But his limbs were leaden, his body betraying him. He could feel her weight pressing down on his chest, the air forced from his lungs as he clawed fingers traced the contours of his face. Desperation sparked a memory. The broom. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, Jack forced his hand to move. Inch by agonizing inch, he slid it under the bed until his fingers brushed the rough wooden handle. With a final, desperate effort, he yanked the broom out and thrust it towards her. The reaction was instantaneous. Lysandra, or the thing wearing her form, let out a blood-curdling shriek that seemed to reverberate through the very walls. She recoiled, her grotesque form contorting as though in agony. Her clawed hands lashed out, but they never reached him. Instead, she vanished, leaving only the faint scent of rot and the sound of Jack's ragged breathing. Jack sat upright, his heart pounding as he clutched the broom like a lifeline. The room was silent again, save for the creak of the old house settling. He stumbled out of bed, his legs shaking, and flicked on every light in the house. The shadows receded, but his terror didn't. Morning came, bringing no comfort. Jack spent the day researching feverishly, poring over local folklore and old records at the library. He learned that the Boo Hag wasn't a tale to frighten children. It was deeply rooted in Gullah Geechee culture, a warning passed down through generations. The more he read, the more he realized how much Lysandra had left out. The Boo Hag wasn't just a malevolent spirit. She was a predator, feeding on the energy of the living to sustain herself. The stories spoke of signs, bruises, exhaustion, and most tellingly, the victim's inability to remember certain nights clearly. Jack's hand trembled as he turned the pages, the pieces falling into place. Lysandra's sudden appearance, her insistence on helping him, her knowledge of the Boo Hag, none of it was coincidence. He returned home that evening with supplies, a sack of blue bottles, salt, and protective charms he'd bought from a local shopkeeper who didn't ask questions. He hung the bottles in the trees around his house, poured lines of salt across every threshold, and placed charms under his pillow. As night fell, Jack sat in the living room, clutching the broom, waiting. The house was eerily quiet, the usual chorus of cicadas and frogs conspicuously absent. Hours passed, and just as he began to think he might be safe, the air grew cold. The lights flickered, and a shadow crept across the room. Jack tightened his grip on the broom, his heart hammering as he braced for the battle to come. Jack didn't see Lysandra again after that night. It was as if the marsh had swallowed her whole, leaving behind nothing but her memory, and the creeping paranoia that followed him like a second shadow. Her absence was a palpable thing, an ache that gnawed at him even as he tried to convince himself he was better off without her. He locked his doors and windows every evening, drawing the blinds tight as if the Boo Hag could be kept out by mere fabric and wood. A broom stood in every corner, an old folk remedy Lysandra had once mentioned in passing. They can't resist counting, she said, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. Scatter a broom's bristles and the Boo Hag will be too busy to bother you. Jack had scoffed at the time, but now he clung to the idea like a talisman. His house began to smell of burnt sage, the acrid scent lingering long after the smoke cleared. He burned it obsessively, pacing from room to room, mumbling prayers he barely remembered learning. It was a futile effort, but it gave him the illusion of control. a fragile thing that shattered every time he caught a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye or heard a creak in the floorboards that didn't belong. But the real scars were not the faint scratches on his skin or the sleepless nights. They were the ones buried deep, invisible yet ever present, etched into his soul by the weight of something he couldn't comprehend. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred, and Jack found himself questioning everything. His memories, his sanity, even his sense of self. Savannah, once a sanctuary, had become a prison. The cobblestone streets, the Spanish moss, no longer charmed him. They mocked him. The city's beauty was now tinged with menace, its history a tapestry of shadows and whispers. Every corner seemed to harbor secrets, every passerby a potential harbinger of something ancient, malevolent. Jack thought about leaving. He even went so far as to pack a bag, shoving clothes and a few essentials into a duffel. But where could he go? The Boo Hag wasn't bound by geography. She was older than borders, older than cities, even Savannah. She was hunger incarnate, a force that moved where it pleased. And somewhere he knew she was waiting. The days dragged on, each one more suffocating than the last. Jack threw himself into repairing the house, desperate to fill the hours and drown out the thoughts that threatened to consume him. He painted the walls, fixed the porch, replaced the broken shutters. But no amount of work could erase that sense of foreboding that hung over the place like a storm cloud. The nights were the worst. Alone in the dark, Jack lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his ears straining for any sound out of place. The cicadas' hum had become a taunt, their constant drone a reminder of the oppressive heat and the isolation that came with it. He tried everything to distract himself. He played music, turned on the TV, even left the lights on all night. But nothing could quiet the whispers in his mind, the echoes of Lysandra's voice, the stories she'd told, the unspoken truths she'd carried in her knowing smile. One night, Jack found himself drawn to the marsh. It was foolish, he knew, but the pull was irresistible. He grabbed a flashlight and ventured out into the sticky night, his breath hitching with every rustle of the reeds. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, the ground soft and treacherous beneath his boots. "Lysandra," he called, his voice trembling. The marsh answered only with silence. He didn't know what he expected to find. Closure, redemption, answers? Instead, he found himself standing knee-deep in the muck, surrounded by shadows that seemed to breathe. The flashlight's beam wavered, catching glimpses of gnarled tree roots and the glint of moonlight on stagnant water. And then he saw it, a figure in the distance, barely more than a silhouette. His heart leapt into his throat as he stumbled forward, his boots sucking against the mud. Lysandra? The figure turned, but it wasn't her. It wasn't anyone. The marsh was empty, its silence deafening. Jack stood frozen, the flashlight shaking in his hand. He didn't dare call out again. The encounter, or lack thereof, haunted him. Jack began to feel as though the marsh was alive, watching him, waiting. He avoided it during the day, but at night he couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered just beyond the edge of his vision. One evening, as he sat on his porch nursing a beer, he noticed the flicker of movement near the tree line. His stomach twisted. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice sharp. No answer came, but the shadows seemed to deepen, pooling unnaturally around the roots of the oaks. Jack grabbed the broom closet closest to him, clutching it like a weapon as he stepped off the porch. "Show yourself!" The laughter came first, soft, lilting, and unmistakably familiar. His breath caught as Lysandra stepped into the light of the porch, her form as radiant as ever. "Lysandra?" She smiled, but it wasn't the warm, inviting smile she remembered. It was cold, predatory. "You missed me," she said, her voice like silk sliding over steel. Jack took a step back, the broom trembling in his hands. "Where have you been?" "Everywhere," she replied, her tone almost wistful. "Nowhere." Something in her eyes stopped him cold. They weren't the luminous orbs he remembered. They were darker, deeper, as if they held the void itself. "What are you?" he whispered. Her smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should have been. "You already know, Jack." That night, the house was silent, but Jack didn't sleep. He sat in his bedroom, the broom propped against the door, the faint scent of sage still clinging to the air. He didn't know if she'd return, but he could feel her presence like a weight pressing against his chest. When the attack came, it wasn't with the drama he'd expected. No crashing windows or howling winds. Just a subtle shift in the air, a sudden stillness that made his skin crawl. And then she was there, standing at the foot of his bed, her skin shimmering unnaturally in the moonlight. "Why fight, Jack?" Lysandra's voice was soft, almost tender. "It'll be easier if you don't." He didn't answer. His grip on the broom tightened as she moved closer, her form shifting, the edges of her body blurring into smoke. "Let me in," she whispered, her words sinking into his mind like a lullaby. Jack swung the broom. The bristles scattered across the floor. Lysandra froze, her expression twisting into one of rage and hunger. The room seemed to vibrate, the air thick with a pressure that made Jack's ears pop. Lysandra let out a guttural hiss and vanished, leaving only the faintest trace of her presence behind. Jack collapsed onto the floor, his body trembling. He knew it wasn't over. It never would be. Somewhere out there, she was waiting, and she wasn't done with him yet. Really quick, before we go, I want to recognize where the idea, the inspiration for this story really came from. In my normal life, I am a school teacher. I teach middle school English and language arts. So we do a lot of short stories, and I came across the short story of the Boo Hag and thought I would put my own twist on it and just kind of update it for now. But I wanted to real quick just give some quick history on this story, because it's not my story. I just told it with my words. So the legend of the Boo Hag comes from the Gullah Geechee culture. It's an African American community in the coastal regions of places like South Carolina, Georgia, and parts of Florida. The story has its roots in West African folklore, where tales of spirits and supernatural entities often warned of dangers lurking in the night. So, a Boo Hag is a sinister kind of vampire-like entity that steals energy instead of blood. Unlike traditional ghosts, though, a Boo Hag has no skin of its own. So by day, it disguises itself in a stolen human skin, blending in with ordinary people. But at night, it sheds the disguise and creeps into homes to, ride sleeping victims. They sit on their chest and drain their life force. So those visited by a Boo Hag would often wake up exhausted, struggling to breathe, or experiencing night terrors. So to protect against a Boo Hag, Folklore suggests leaving a broom or a colander by the door. Since Boo Hags are said to be these obsessive counters, they'll get distracted trying to count the bristles or the holes until the sun rises. Another defense is painting doors and window sills haint blue. It's a shade of blue believed to confuse spirits and prevent them from entering. The Boo Hag legend reflects cultural fears of the unknown, sleep paralysis, and even themes of deception and hidden dangers. And I think it's a really fascinating example of how African storytelling traditions blended into Southern folklore. And it created, for me, one of the most eerie, enduring ghost stories in the American South. So, again, that was my version of the Boo Hag story, but the Boo Hag is not mine. It is 100% African American culture. I just really loved the idea of that story and wanted to tell a modern tale of it and maybe update it a little bit for today. Again, not my story, my words this time, but it is the Gullah Geechee culture and it's their story. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please give me any feedback. And if you're out there and you like darker stories like this, check out my podcasts. I've got 3. There's Real Talk, where I break down films from all genres with unfiltered discussions. There's Real Talk Horror Edition, where I explore the eerie, unsettling, and blood-curdling brilliance of horror cinema. And my newest show, Real Talk Grim Edition. Similar to this story, except what I do is I take the original Grimm stories and we break them down, talking themes and morals and how they apply to modern society. If you like any of this, you like what I'm doing, give me a rating, a review, leave a comment. Let's have a conversation. You can also find me over on the normal socials, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. Same as here on YouTube at Real Talk. You can also send me an email, old school, therealrealtalk@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your opinions or just say hi. Let's have a conversation. But with that, thanks for taking the time to listen to my story today. I hope you enjoyed it, maybe learned something about more modern folklore that is told here in America. But with that, I want to thank you and have a great day, everybody.